Mason Reed had spent years ruling Ridgeway Academy. Untouchable, unchallenged. His last name alone carried power. His father on the school board, his friends controlling every social circle. Mason didn't lose. Ever. Until the day he picked the wrong girl to mess with. One moment, one mistake, one fight, and suddenly, everything changed. Because Zara Bryant wasn't like the others. She didn't flinch, didn't break, didn't beg. She fought back, and in front of the entire school, she put Mason on his back. Now, the fear of Mason Reed was gone. The whispers had started, the power had shifted, and Mason? He wasn't the king anymore. But if Mason couldn't beat Zara in a fight, he'd do something worse. He'd erase her completely. Because in Ridgeway Academy, power isn't taken, it's stolen. And Mason was about to play the dirtiest game of his life. The only question was, could Zara survive it? Zara Bryant stepped into Ridgeway Academy, and she felt it instantly. The shift, the weight of unspoken rules that had dictated these halls for years, had changed overnight. For so long, she had been just another face, an outsider, a scholarship student surrounded by legacy kids who never let her forget it. But now they saw her. Now they knew her name. As she walked past rows of lockers, conversations quieted. People turned, their gazes lingering in a way they never had before. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just another student passing through. Zara Bryant was the girl who had put Mason Reed on the ground. And that made her someone worth watching. A group of juniors near the vending machine spoke just loud enough for her to hear. "I still can't believe it." One of them shook his head, eyes wide. "Did you see how fast she flipped him?" Another scoffed. "Bro." Mason looked shook, like actually scared. They weren't talking to her, but they wanted her to hear. She could sense it in the way their voices carried, in the way their eyes darted toward her when they thought she wasn't looking. Zara kept her expression neutral, refusing to let the satisfaction show. She had spent months keeping her head down, pretending she didn't hear the whispers about whether she deserved to be here, whether she could keep up. Now, those same voices were the ones spreading her name. When she entered the cafeteria, the reaction was even stronger. She felt the shift in atmosphere, like the static in the air before a storm. Whispers buzzed from table to table, heads turned, phones slid discreetly out of pockets. A few students actually nudged their friends, nodding toward her as if to confirm she was really there. But Zara wasn't the only one feeling the shift. Mason Reed sat at his usual table near the center of the cafeteria, where he had always commanded attention without needing to say a word. But today, for the first time, the power didn't belong to him. He sat rigid, jaw clenched, fingers curled around his untouched soda can. He didn't speak. He didn't smirk. He didn't move. His friends tried to act normal, laughing too loudly, shoving each other like nothing had changed. But it had. No one was looking at them. They were looking at her. Zara didn't break stride as she moved through the cafeteria, tray in hand, acting as if nothing had changed. But she felt Mason's eyes on her, burning into her back like a brand. She didn't have to look to know he was watching. She had taken something from him yesterday. Something Mason Reed had never lost before. Fear, control, power. And if there was one thing a guy like Mason couldn't stand, it was losing. He couldn't fight her again. He knew that. If he tried, he'd lose. Again. But Mason didn't need to win a fight to destroy someone. He had connections, influence, a last name that meant something in this school, in this town. His father sat on the Ridgeway Academy school board. Zara might have won the battle, but Mason was already planning how to win the war. If he played this right, she wouldn't just lose the respect she had gained. She'd lose everything. The soft vibration of her phone against the desk barely registered at first. Zara ignored it, keeping her focus on the calculus problem in front of her. She wasn't about to let yesterday's chaos distract her from what mattered. But when the screen lit up again, curiosity got the best of her. She glanced down. Unknown number. Meet me at the admin office after school. It's important. She frowned. No name, no explanation, just a cryptic message that felt too deliberate. Probably a prank, or maybe someone trying to ride the wave of attention she hadn't asked for. Either way, she didn't have time for it. She locked her phone and turned back to her notes, pushing the message from her mind. But by lunchtime, she knew something was wrong. The energy in the cafeteria had shifted again. Yesterday, people had watched her with curiosity, admiration, even a little fear. Today, the stares were different. The whispers were still there, but now they carried something new. Doubt. Suspicion. Near the salad bar, two seniors exchanged glances as she walked past. At a nearby table, a girl leaned into her friend's ear, her eyes flicking to Zara before looking away too quickly. Conversation stopped just a second too late, like people didn't want her to hear what they were saying. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't about Mason anymore. This was something else. She grabbed a tray, forcing herself to act normal. But before she could take another step, Sam practically ran up to her. "Zara!" His voice was urgent, breathless, his face pale. She set her tray down, alarmed. "What's wrong?" Sam glanced around, as if checking who might be listening, then lowered his voice. "They're saying you cheated on your last exam." Her grip on the tray tightened. "What?" "I don't know how it started, but people are talking," Sam said quickly. "There's an email. Apparently it came from your account. A confession." The air in the cafeteria suddenly felt heavier, suffocating. A fake email. A false confession. Zara's mind raced, putting the pieces together almost instantly. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't some random rumor spiraling out of control. This was calculated. Precise. This was Mason. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay calm. Panic wouldn't help her now. "I didn't send any confession," she said firmly. "I know," Sam said. "But the principal's investigating, and people are already making up their minds. If you don't shut this down fast, it won't matter what's true." Zara's pulse pounded, but her expression remained unreadable. She had expected Mason to retaliate. She just hadn't expected him to be this good at it. The call came during fourth period. Zara had barely settled into her seat when the classroom door opened, and a student aide stepped in. "Principal Hastings wants to see you." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. The teacher barely glanced up from the attendance sheet before nodding. "Go ahead, Zara." She kept her expression neutral as she gathered her things, but inside, she already knew. This wasn't random. This wasn't routine. This was the next move in Mason's game. The walk to the principal's office felt longer than usual. Ridgeway Academy's hallways stretched endlessly, every passing student's gaze seeming to linger just a second too long. The weight of whispers from the cafeteria still clung to her, pressing against her spine. When she stepped into the office, Principal Hastings was waiting. His usual calm, professional demeanor was intact, but there was something else there too, something heavier. On his desk, a printed email sat neatly in front of him. Even from where she stood, Zara could see the bold subject line. Subject: My confession. I admit that I stole the exam answers before the test. I regret my actions and hope this can be resolved quietly. Signed, Zara Bryant. Her stomach twisted, but she didn't let it show. Principal Hastings folded his hands, eyes locked onto her. "Zara, do you have anything to say about this?" She blinked, tilting her head slightly, letting just the right amount of confusion cross her face. "I don't understand," she said carefully. "This email was sent from your school account last night," Hastings continued, pushing the paper toward her. "Straight to the administration office." She looked down at the printed words, keeping her breathing steady. The email was flawless, her name, her phrasing, even the way she structured her sentences. Whoever wrote this knew how to imitate her, and Mason Reed was many things, but he wasn't a hacker, which meant someone had helped him. "I didn't write this," Zara said finally, lifting her gaze to meet Hastings. His expression didn't change. "Zara, this is serious. This could lead to expulsion." Her jaw clenched, but she forced herself to stay in control. Panic wouldn't help her. Defensiveness would make her look guilty. So instead, she nodded slowly, as if she were just now processing everything. I don't know what's going on, but I swear, I never wrote that email." Hastings exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "There will be an investigation, of course. But given the nature of the accusation, the school board has already been informed. You need to understand what's at stake here." Zara kept her expression carefully composed. She understood perfectly. Mason didn't just want revenge. He wanted to erase her. And if she didn't figure out how to prove this was fake, he just might succeed. Zara didn't waste time. The moment she left Principal Hastings' office, she headed straight for the library. She needed proof, and she needed it fast. The whispers had spread through the school like wildfire. She could feel them pressing against her as she moved through the hallways. Some students glanced at her with uncertainty, others with outright suspicion. The shift was happening faster than she expected. Mason had designed this perfectly. He didn't just want her to get in trouble. He wanted to turn the entire school against her. But he made one mistake. Mason wasn't smart enough to forge a perfect email trail on his own. And she knew exactly who could help her track down the truth. Eli Torres. Zara spotted him at his usual table in the back of the library, surrounded by a mess of open textbooks and a laptop covered in stickers. Eli was one of the few students at Ridgeway who actually understood computers beyond just using them. And more importantly, he owed her a favor. She dropped into the seat across from him. "I need you to trace an email." Eli barely looked up from his laptop. "That's not how you start a conversation, Zara." She folded her arms. "Eli." Now he glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "That sounds illegal." "So is framing someone," she shot back. That got his attention. He studied her for a second, then sighed. "Fine. Give me the details." Zara quickly explained what had happened. The forged email, the fake confession, the fact that someone had access to her school account. Eli leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. "Okay, here's the thing. If it was really sent from your account, I can't do much. But if someone spoofed it, made it look like it came from you, there'll be a trail." He cracked his knuckles and turned back to his laptop. "Give me 20 minutes. Zara drummed her fingers on the table, forcing herself to stay patient as Eli's screen flashed with lines of code. She wasn't a tech expert, but she knew whatever he was doing was way beyond anything Mason was capable of. After exactly 18 minutes, Eli let out a low whistle. "Wow, your boy Mason? Not as slick as he thinks." Zara leaned forward. "What did you find?" Eli spun his laptop toward her. On the screen was a log of activity from the school's network. "The email wasn't sent from your personal account," Eli said. "It was sent from a school laptop." Zara's eyes narrowed. "Whose?" Eli tapped the screen, highlighting a name. Ryan Matthews. Mason's best friend. Zara stared at the name for a second before a slow smirk curled across her lips. "Gotcha." The cafeteria was packed, the usual hum of conversation bouncing off the walls as students ate, laughed, and gossiped. But Zara wasn't here to eat. She was here to end this. She spotted Mason Reed exactly where she expected, his usual table in the center of the room, surrounded by his loyal followers. Ryan Matthews sat beside him, laughing at something, completely unaware that his name was sitting in the school's digital records, tied to the laptop that framed her. Zara didn't hesitate. She walked straight up to them, her steps steady, deliberate. Conversations around the table quieted as people noticed her approach. A few students nearby nudged their friends, sensing something was about to go down. Mason leaned back in his chair, smirking like a man who thought he had already won. "Well, look who it is," he drawled, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. "Should have known Ridgeway wasn't your kind of school." His friends chuckled, some exchanging knowing glances. Zara didn't react. No anger, no frustration. Just a calm, unreadable expression as she tilted her head slightly. "You're right, Mason," she said smoothly. "But you know what's funny?" Mason raised an eyebrow, intrigued but still cocky. "What's that?" She took another step closer, lowering her voice just enough that only their table could hear, but not so low that the people around them wouldn't notice something was happening. "The IT department keeps a record of every email sent from school laptops." Mason's smirk flickered for half a second. Just a moment. A fraction of hesitation. Zara caught it, and she knew he had just figured it out. "But that's not even the best part," she continued, pulling out her phone and tapping the screen. "Even the deleted ones." Ryan shifted in his seat. Mason's fingers curled into a fist on the table. The table had gone completely silent now. Zara didn't stop. She turned the phone toward them, letting them see the proof. The screen displaying the digital logs Eli had pulled up. Ryan's name highlighted in yellow, clear as day. Mason exhaled through his nose, his jaw tightening. "That's a lie," Ryan blurted out, but his voice cracked slightly. Zara arched an eyebrow. "Then why do you look nervous?" Ryan's face paled. Mason shot him a quick glare, and Ryan clamped his mouth shut. Zara took her time, sliding her phone into her pocket. Then she pressed record. "I think the whole school might want to hear this," she said, her voice calm. Mason leaned forward, his voice low and sharp. "You wouldn't." Zara smiled. "Try me." For the first time, Mason looked genuinely unsure. The auditorium buzzed with quiet conversation as students filled the seats. The entire school had been called for a mandatory assembly on academic integrity, and everyone knew exactly why. The rumor mill had been working overtime, and by now, most of Ridgeway Academy believed Zara Bryant was guilty. She sat in the middle of the room, calm, collected, her hands resting on her lap. She knew how this was supposed to go. Principal Hastings would come out, make an example of her, and her fate would be sealed. Expulsion. Reputation destroyed. Game over. Except Mason Reed had made one mistake. Zara wasn't here to lose. A hush fell over the crowd as Principal Hastings stepped onto the stage. He adjusted his tie, glancing briefly in Zara's direction before addressing the room. "Students, academic honesty is the foundation of Ridgeway Academy," he began, his voice firm. "Cheating undermines everything we stand for. It's come to our attention that—" Zara stood. Gasps rippled through the room. All eyes snapped to her. "Before we talk about cheating," she said, her voice steady, clear, "I think everyone should see this." Murmurs swept across the auditorium. Students exchanged confused glances. On stage, Principal Hastings frowned. "Miss Bryant, this is not the time." Zara ignored him. She pulled out her phone, held it up to the microphone, and tapped play. The speakers crackled for a moment. Then, Mason's voice filled the auditorium. "So what? You think anyone cares?" A collective gasp swept through the crowd. On the far side of the room, Mason went rigid in his seat. Zara let it sink in for a beat. Then, she played the next clip. "The IT department keeps a record of every email sent from school laptops, even the deleted ones." A pin could have dropped in the silence that followed. The students turned in their seats, eyes locking onto Mason. Mason's face had lost all color. His jaw tightened, but his usual arrogance was nowhere to be found. Zara wasn't done. She lifted her phone again, this time displaying the final piece of proof. The email logs, Eli's evidence showing exactly where the forged confession had been sent from. A school laptop. Ryan Matthews' login. Ryan looked like he wanted to disappear. Principal Hastings stared at the screen, then at Mason. The weight of realization settled over his expression. "Mason Reed," he said, his tone clipped. "My office. Now." A wave of gasps, whispers, and pure shock filled the auditorium. Mason didn't move at first. His hands clenched into fists, his entire body locked in place. But there was no getting out of this. Slowly, stiffly, he stood, his shoulders tense, his face burning red. He walked toward the exit in silence. Zara sat back down. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She had just done what Mason never could. She had won. The next morning, Ridgeway Academy felt different. Zara Bryant had spent months walking through these halls as if she barely existed. She had been the scholarship student, the outsider, the one who people only noticed when they needed someone to look down on. But today, as she stepped through the doors, she felt the weight of every gaze on her. And for once, she wasn't being looked at with doubt. She wasn't being ignored. She was being respected. Mason Reed was gone. Suspended indefinitely. No one knew if he was coming back, and no one seemed to care. The power he once held over this school had disappeared overnight. His absence was louder than his presence had ever been. The hallway he once dominated was eerily quiet. The people who used to cling to him now sat in silence, unsure of what to do without their leader. His table in the cafeteria sat empty. His friends, once the loudest voices in the room, were suddenly nobodies. Ryan Matthews hadn't even shown up to school. The rest of them blended into the crowd like they had never been part of Mason's reign. And Zara? She wasn't invisible anymore. The moment she entered the main hallway, she felt the shift. The way people's eyes lingered on her as she walked by. The hushed conversations that didn't stop in time. The way students who had never even acknowledged her existence before suddenly seemed aware of her. A group of juniors near the vending machine whispered as she passed. "I still can't believe it. That was legendary. Mason's finished, man. He's not coming back from that." She really outplayed him. For months, these were the same students who had looked through her like she was nothing. Now, they spoke about her like she was someone to admire. It wasn't fear. It wasn't pity. It was respect. For the first time since she had set foot in Ridgeway Academy, Zara Bryant belonged. She made her way toward her locker, moving like nothing had changed, even though everything had. She wasn't about to let all of this attention go to her head. She had never needed anyone's approval before, and she wasn't going to start now. Still, the feeling was satisfying. She had proven herself in a way that no one could take away. As she spun her lock, she spotted Sam waiting for her a few feet away, arms crossed, a stupid grin plastered on his face. "So," he said, dragging out the word, "how does it feel being Ridgeway royalty?" Zara scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Please, it's not that deep." Sam snorted. "Right. That's why half the school is watching you right now." She didn't have to turn around to know he was completely right. People weren't just looking at her anymore. They were paying attention, and Zara knew exactly what they were thinking. She had done the impossible. She had taken on Mason Reed, the king of Ridgeway Academy, and she had won. Not just in a fight, not just with the truth. She had beaten him where it mattered most. Mason had tried to erase her. Instead, he erased himself. His reputation was in ruins. His power was gone. And Zara, she was still standing. Because there are some people you just don't mess with. And Mason Reed had learned that the hard way.